Hello and welcome. As people are just joining, I just see numbers going up there. So welcome to Net Zero Festival, the virtual festival brought to you by the installer. Thanks very much for joining. Just as we get online here, you might see that we have a poll that we're going to share with you. So please take a look at your screens and let us know the heat source you think will play the biggest part in getting to net zero by 2050. Because we're here today to discuss that, to discuss the launch of a new white paper launched by Danfoss. So we're gonna be getting into that, and we've got some special guests to discuss that with here today. We'll have some time as well to field some of your questions. So there's a chat box and there's a Q&A feature as well. So please do feel free to type them in, and we'll field those and get back to you. Just a quick intro. So we know heating in buildings is responsible for around 30% of the final energy consumption in the EU. And so achieving that target of net zero by 2050 is going to require a huge step change in how we heat and how we cool homes and buildings. So that's the background and the challenge that we're here to discuss. We're going to highlight some solutions that are perhaps already available to help play a part towards that goal. And we're going to look at some of the challenges and some of the finer points about actually getting there and implementing it. So we are joined by Gareth Ash, who is a marketing manager at Danfoss, and we'll introduce the paper in a moment. We've got Colin Timmins, director of the H&V sector at BEAMA, Tim Pollard, who's a sustainability expert and principal at Pollard & Pollard, and Lee Fisher, gas engineer and owner of Green Albion. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Wonderful to have you here. That's really the welcome for me. Let me just share some of the results that we have actually from this first poll, in that it looks like heat pumps with a slight lead in terms of sort of popularity around the heat sources we think are going to be the most efficient part, the biggest part, sorry to say, of getting to net zero, but certainly all the options there kind of playing a part. So maybe Gareth, you could start us off by introducing the white paper and sort of what it contains.
Of course, thanks, Ben. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. The challenge of achieving net zero in the heating sector is something we identified within Danfoss as being quite central to what we do and what we offer to the market. So we worked with a number of people and an external agency to really look deeper into the challenges that we currently face to achieve net zero by 2050, and the possible solutions that are in place or are already available to get there today. So in a nutshell, we basically look at, not in huge detail, but we look in some detail at the solutions that are available, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's heat pumps, district heating, or even electric heating as properties become better insulated and have less need for heat load, certainly for space heating. Then there become more options available that require less energy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks Gareth, and we'll get into it in a bit more detail. Perhaps you can bring in some perspectives, but maybe I'll bring in Colin and just ask, do we think we're in a position to really bring all homes up to a net zero standard at the moment?
Probably not right now. I think even if you were looking at an individual house, it would be a very difficult and costly process to do that. So a lot of the infrastructure needs time to come on board. We need a flexible grid. We need a hydrogen network for people to connect to, and they're going to take time to be there. It's a question really of the scale of the challenge that I think people need to grasp, and particularly with governments. If we're talking about every home net zero by 2050, that's about 2,500 upgraded every day, and that's upgraded completely to net zero. That's not just you know, having a boiler replaced or a bit of insulation, that's a complete refurbishment. So there's a hell of a lot of work to do. You know, we expect you know, big strategies coming out later this year to show how that's going to happen. It's a huge challenge, and I don't think anyone should underestimate how big that challenge is.
And great point about sort of the scale of it, and particularly then, you know, for one of those 2,500 individuals who's going through that refurbishment a day, like how practical, perhaps, Tim, do you think this is for people?
Well, of course, how long's a piece of string, really? Because it depends on the nature of your house and the state of your house. And I think that's the vastness of the challenge, because we have such a rich and varied housing stock here in the UK. The one thing we know is that 80% of the houses that are standing today will still be standing in 2050. So this is the challenge. The challenge is not new build. You know, that's relatively easy. We're on a green field. We've got lots and lots of opportunities to build in the right stuff. The challenge is, what do we do with our existing stock, and can people afford to do it? And you know, do people want to do it? Is the question. And it's certainly a massive, massive challenge. But nonetheless, it's one we can't shirk. It's one that has to happen. And government is going to have to try and get a bit creative, I'm afraid, and also be brave. And brave and politicians are not words you normally hear in the same sentence, really. So I'm looking forward to seeing some fairly dynamic stuff, whether it'll be come from this government or future governments. One thing's for certain: we're going to have to start doing things in a different way and in a different scale.
Great, yeah, thanks, Tim. And then sort of finally, Lee, from a gas engineer installer perspective, you know, what are the biggest challenges that you're kind of seeing? Is it around training, sort of the skills gap in the installation?
Yes, definitely, and all of the above. I think, you know, the chasm from where we are to where we need to be is huge. I think, you know, I personally think we need better research. We need data. We need to be able to say, you know, this is what you need to do. We need best practices established. And then, yeah, I think the skills gap is going to be quite big. You know, if you just look at the heat source, if we go the hydrogen route to transfer from a natural gas to hydrogen, for an installer won't be that tricky. You know, you might need a different analyzer, you might need slightly different readings and such, but it's not going to be huge. But for me, the problem is, it's the overall building performance side of it, which we have to get a grip of. And that, I think, heating installers need to be key, you know, or somebody has to take that overall approach. I was looking at a property last week and I was there. It's a, you know, early 1900s built end terrace, and it's got 9, I believe, single glazed sash windows. To replace those and make them double glazed, it's £2,000 a window. And it's just, you look at that, it's a property that rents for 500 quid a month. And then you've still got the oil boiler, you've still got the solid walls that aren't sorted. So, you know, the cost of renovating a property like that, you know, I think something that's not often discussed as well, I think a good approach, we might have to ring fence certain houses and just say they aren't going to make the grid. You know, I think particularly the post-war and the prefab, so, you know, the temporary houses that were chucked up for a few years and many people still living now, I think, you know, maybe there will be difficult things to, you know, be said that we have to maybe rule out some of the housing stock from this process.
Is that something you guys considered there, Gareth? Is that, did you pop that in the white paper? Is it certain things?
Probably not quite to that extent, to be perfectly honest. You know, it's all really valid points, and I think the white paper really identifies that there isn't one solution for every property. You know, every property is different, and there needs to be a lot of consideration. But the simple fact is that the longer we leave it, the more it's going to cost us as a nation, to you know, both in terms of climate change and action that needs to be taken later on to implement these measures to be able to achieve this goal. So, you know, the white paper is very much the beginning of a journey, if you like, for us. And it also looks at commercial buildings. So it's not just residential. There's a lot that can be done in the existing offices, in cities up and down the country, in schools and hospitals and all the public buildings as well. So it's quite a broad looking document.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the government's helped you there by closing most of them.
Yeah.
That was a huge opportunity, yeah.
No, I think, you know, let's not forget that the vast majority of houses, more than 65% of houses, are owner occupied. You know, these are you and me and our families. And can we afford to do this? You know, how much can we afford to do? When can we do it? You know, what about the hassle if you're having solid wall insulation done? You know, might mean evacuating the house. I'm personally of the opinion that we're better off getting started with something which we can do, you know, with not too much challenge. I've always felt that if we can demonstrate to people that they can save a bit of brass and make a difference in terms of the environment by doing something which is relatively affordable, a couple of £100 or something like, then I have a much greater chance of convincing them to do something bigger. Mm. And that's why I like to sort of, you know, start at the bottom, see what you can do with what you've got before you start replacing what you've got with something which is going to be quite expensive. And here there's a fantastic opportunity for controls, for filtration, looking at pumps, for example, one of the biggest electricity uses in your home. And you know, if you've got an old single speed pump, then you're wasting a lot of electricity. So there are things we can do, and there are things which, you know, for the first time in my 30-year career, I could sell a product which was sexy, you know, which was heating controls, which I could operate from my phone, you know. But before then, everything was grey and plastic and looked pretty nasty, didn't it? So I think we've got an opportunity to help people to make the right decisions, but we've got to understand that these decisions are simply the first step on a long, long road, which is going to end up being quite expensive. And the government has to understand whether they want to help people with their own homes or whether they want to simply force people in their own homes to do something. But there has to be a strategy.
An interesting point about sort of behavior shaping then attitude. Very, you know, like from psychology as well, that's absolutely sort of the way around it usually works, rather than people think, oh, you get people with the attitude and then you get the behavior. And some ideas there as well about things that we might not have thought about before, or elements we might have overlooked. I mean, Colin, is that, you know, other elements of improving homes that you think aren't getting any, you know, enough attention perhaps at the moment?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there always has been a lot. You know, the fact it's not a requirement to put TRVs in when you replace a boiler at the moment has been, you know, a big hole in the building regulations for an awful long time. But hopefully something that's going to be put right in the next round. I mean, there's two challenges really. I mean, one is providing enough fuel that's zero carbon that we can use. I mean, if you look at the example of these big old houses that you can't really do much about, well, maybe they'll just need a fuel that is zero carbon and they can use a lot of it. And then it's other houses that have to use less. And the other challenge is about reducing demand. And I think that's the one that we can tackle now. I think that we can do that. I mean, controls is one aspect, definitely. You know, and there's a lot of other things that we need to make sure that we've got in place in homes. You know, if we think about, you know, renewables that are on site, you know, energy storage, even things like having broadband and a smart meter, because they're enablers, you know, of grid flexibility for the future. So, you know, there's a hell of a lot that we can do. And I think the key message for government at the moment is we need to do all of it. You know, we cannot just have gaps in the building regulations. And if we put a boiler in, it shouldn't be an either or between a smart control and a load compensation or weather compensation. You know, it should be both. You've got to make sure the boiler's operating efficiently, and you've got to have the smart control there as well. And you've got to have room control, so you're reducing the demand around the house. And you know, that's got to be the key message. We've got to do everything that we can in the next 10, 15 years before we get to the point where we have hydrogen that people can connect to. I don't know how long that will be exactly, but hydrogen sounds like a great solution because you can just replace the gas boiler with a hydrogen boiler and put it in. But when that change happens, you want the demand in the house for the boiler to be as low as you can possibly get it, and that's the challenge that we can address quite quickly.
And in terms of that reducing demand piece as well, like what's the role of the installer, do you think, Lee, in that? I mean, is that sort of conversations that you
it's interesting. I mean, hold my hands up, I made a huge mistake. I refurbed this house 3 years ago when I bought it, and I fitted slightly bigger radiators, but I didn't have the knowledge or the experience of Twitter and to know about I didn't, and to know about low temp, and that I should have put underfloor in. I was obviously familiar with underfloor, but I genuinely didn't realise the benefits that had I put that in, I could run the boiler at a lower temperature and make those savings. And for me at the minute, I really don't understand why we aren't focusing on, low temp would be a big thing, so whether it is bigger radiators or underfloor, that could just be, that's sign a piece of paper. You have to design all new builds at a 50-degree floor temp instead of 70. It just makes sense to me. It's just, I think it's a big thing, and it comes back to the knowledge side of it, as well. It's and if a heating engineer, and that was me doing up my own house, as a heating engineer, I didn't know I should have done that, and it would have been better. So to get this knowledge out there to the mass market and for consumers, it's, we've got a long way to go.
I mean, and to do that, I mean, Tim, you were talking about government getting creative. Is that about, obviously, like there's the regulation side of it, but then maybe there's also the knowledge sharing and, kind of a campaign around it? What?
And I think undoubtedly, and I think, Lee made a fantastically good point. The heat emitters have been the sort of forgotten giant of the system, really. We keep saying, oh, you should have a fantastic new efficient boiler. But if you're fitting it in 25-year-old rads, which are full of sludge and, then you ain't going to be having a highly efficient boiler. And the trouble is that we as the public are completely non-expert buyers. So we depend on our professionals to give us that advice, or the government, but hopefully professionals as opposed to the government. And I think that the other thing is that I'm sure Lee would be the first to shout about is it's fine having regulations, but if the regulations are unpoliced, then they're completely useless. So you can bring in the tightest possible building regs, but if an inspector's not going to come around and say, you failed, you can't do any more installations, then they're completely useless. So I think we've got to have a transparency in this whole thing. And I think that's where the problem has risen. And there's been a kind of warfare between the different solutions, so the heat pump manufacturers slag off the hydrogen guys, and the hydrogen guys slag off the heat pump guys, and then, the solar guys don't like it. And rather than being open and honest and saying, look, all these things come with a massive challenge. It doesn't matter which of those things you choose, there is a massive challenge. You don't make hydrogen without producing carbon. What are you going to do with the carbon? You're going to bury it. Is that a good thing? Where are you going to store this hydrogen? Are we going to have gasometers like we used to have, down the gasworks? Heat pumps need a lot of electricity. We ain't got nearly enough electricity, and they require well-insulated homes. We ain't got well-insulated homes. So all these things require a challenge. And what I think the role of government has to be, let's be honest and transparent and say these things and say, these are the challenges, and it's up to an industry and as a country, us all to tackle those things. But without being honest, then people are simply, they can't make a valid decision because they haven't got the valid information to make it. Perhaps I'm ranting now. It has been said in the past.
It's a valid rant though, Tim. I think, there's a big issue as well at the minute, the fact all boilers are A-rated. No matter which boiler I fit tomorrow, it's aerated. So I could fit one tomorrow that when you switch it on, it would burn 1 kilowatt in its first hour. For the heating in the same property, I could fit one that would burn 30. But they've both got that A badge. And the A is simply based on, it's the percentage of heat you get from the gas burnt, rather than looking at how much gas it actually uses. And for me, that's a huge thing. And whichever approach we go, we need that transparency to say, this is what it's going to cost you. You know, if you fit this boiler, this hydrogen boiler, this heat pump, it's going to need X. And we don't have that sort of information available. Well, I don't anyway.
Absolutely. I mean, so we've got a question or two actually sort of coming in now from the audience. Please do type in other questions, or we'll come and ask you. But yeah, about the sort of regulations coming in that we need to be aware of. Are there sort of changes that we see there? I don't know, Gareth, Colin, Tim, if you guys have a comment on that.
Well, if that's the building regulations, I mean the building regulations are delayed in terms of Part L and Part F because of coronavirus. But what we've seen officially is the consultation on new homes, which is, you know, in 5 years' time, you'll have to have low carbon heating in there, and from, you know, the outset, you'll have to have a low temperature system going in. So, you know, there's a big move there for new homes. I mean, as Tim says, I mean, it's almost like the easy part of the equation is to make sure new homes are built efficiently. We haven't yet seen the regulations for existing homes, you know, and that's the area where I think that does need to be changed, because that's the opportunity. You know, if we're replacing boilers now, then they need to be fitted alongside measures to improve the system efficiency, you know, for the future. And that could be low temperature systems, better controls, making sure that balancing and sizing and other aspects are done correctly. You know, so we've got to make sure that we have some robust regulations for existing homes coming through.
And how important, Colin, would you say that the regulations are, you know, as a balance? You know, should we be focused on that regulation, or
they've got to be setting high standards? They've got to be right. I think the downfall, so to speak, on existing homes is that they only apply when work is done. You know, and the bigger challenge is making sure that more homes have work done. You know, there's about 1.5 million boilers replaced every year. So, you know, that's a lot. But if we're trying to do, you know, 2,500 refurbs a day, then how do we make sure that people are actually getting work done in their homes? And that I mean, ultimately, it's probably going to come down to financial incentives and fiscal measures and things like that. But we've got to make it more attractive to people. So we've got to get the building regulations right when work is done, but we've also got to stimulate the work being done.
Yeah, I'm struggling to do the maths in my head there, 2,500 a day and a million overall. But I mean, absolutely. I mean, Tim, any other little sort of snippets of like how do you get people to do that work in your home? How, you know, is it social pressure from next door if they've done it? You'll do it.
Inevitably, money talks, doesn't it? If the value of your house was better because it was more efficient, I always thought it was a great catastrophe that EPCs weren't both better developed and better implemented, because they could be the currency of energy efficiency, you know, and if for example your mortgage depended on, you know, becoming a B-rated house or whatever the standard was, then that would certainly encourage people, wouldn't it, to do the right thing. But let's not forget, whatever we do, we have to be able to make it accessible for everyone, you know. So, you know, whilst you as an enormously rich person might be able to afford to do these things, but not everybody can, and that's the point. But if we can engage everybody in the challenge, and I think it would be really, really, really beneficial in all senses. And I think politicians would recognise it. You know, you tell a politician it's a vote winner, and I guarantee you that he's going to support it. But so I'd prefer to see the link made financially somehow, whether it be through relaxation of local taxes, or whether it be in terms of achieving a mortgage or something like that. Something which is really tangible and people can understand.
I think you've nailed it there with the two key points for me: the EPC and the mortgage, and the potential of that. So if you buy a house that's a D, which is an EPC, but you need to then spend 30 grand to get it to a C, the house should then be worth 30 grand, and it should be clear, you know, and that should be transparent. And I think we could offer it, you know, it could be a policy to consider that, you know, it's part of the mortgage. So it's when properties change hands, that's when we need to be getting a grip of them. I think it'd be a good chance for that. And if you offer top-ups on mortgages, so you buy the house for 200 grand, but you can also, at the same rates, lend 20 grand for the efficiencies if they're done right. And so much of this, historically, even over the last 10 years, heat pumps chucked on systems that shouldn't be, are not done right, so then the value isn't there. And that's why it's not then appreciated. And it's just, tricky.
Yeah, for sure. Gareth, did you want to sort of jump in on that one?
I think there's a couple of points, actually. I think there's just on, you know, how do we convince people to make these changes? I think manufacturers have an important role to play in providing installers with the information and the arguments to give to their customers. Yeah. So looking at potential energy savings of fitting TRVs and effective controls to a system, and giving the installers that information so that it easily tells the story to their customers that, you know, there are savings to be made. And I think also we shouldn't forget, you know, there's a lot of social housing, so local authority, there's a lot of properties that are tenanted, that are owned by landlords privately. So the government really needs to do something to engage with those people to improve the efficiency of those properties. As Lee touched on earlier, you know, if you've got a property that's letting for £500 a month and it's going to cost £2,000 to replace each sash window that's currently single glazed with double glazing, it's not a viable option for a landlord to do. They'll just continue to let the property for £500 a month without you know, doing anything to improve the efficiency. So there's so many things to consider, you know, but really the manufacturers, I believe, play an important role in engaging with the installers of this country and helping, working with them to provide training and to also help with giving them the tools to then sell the benefits of these additional measures to their customers.
Absolutely. And on that sort of, on that, you know, the manufacturers role and some of the products perhaps, you know, available. We actually did have a sort of a question here from Sam about, it's just interested in finding out more about electric boilers and air source heat pumps. What are the, you know, interesting perhaps, you know, products in your view that really could play a big part while being quite practical?
Yeah, I think, you know, I mean, heat pumps, I don't know an awful lot about because they're not in our area of responsibility, or they're not in our portfolio, I should say. At Danfoss, we're more about control and balancing. Although, you know, it's not. If you're looking at electric heating with the renewable energy that's now becoming available on the grid, you know, electric floor heating is a solution, or panel heaters, or air source heat pumps with solar panels. You know, there's lots of different ways. I think the important thing is as part of the training package is that needs to be given to installers, is helping them to identify the correct measure for the type of property. It's no good going and fitting a heat pump in a poorly insulated property or electric floor heating in a poorly insulated property, because you'll just leak money. It's about being able to identify the right solution. So I would see that installers are probably going to need to be a little bit more multi-skilled going forwards in terms of technology types, because it really is going to be quite varied, the map going forward. I can see a real transition away from this you know, majority of gas boiler providing the heating in the UK. It really does need to move on now to something else.
And so then, I mean, Lee, that sounds a bit like a sort of a challenge back to install, isn't it? To sort of upskill in like all these different technologies. It's hard to kind of know maybe where to start or what to recommend.
Yeah, and it's hard to know. You kind of, I view mine as a business, and I have, because I've mentioned this village I look after, the 50 houses that I've got to look at improving. They're all on oil, and so the client's desperate for me to get my oil qualification. But do I want to do that at the minute with where we're at with things? I mean, would you personally want to spend a couple of grand and then have to buy all the different tools to be an oil engineer right now? It's hard, and you have to, I think a lot of installers out there will quite happily, and there's nothing wrong with that, just keep doing what they do until they're told otherwise. Obviously GasSafe hasn't been, and Corgi before, hasn't particularly been around that long, but as soon as someone decided that was the way, you had to do that qualification to do the job. Likewise with unvented cylinders, and it's that. It is, I think, whether it is for gas engineers or another party or something, there's the term retrofit coordinator, whether somebody needs to take the overall approach, I think, and look at houses as a whole, definitely. And what Gareth's been saying about the concentrating on the hydraulic balancing and the controls, and we can get this right now, whatever it's fueled by in the future, really.
Yeah, I think it could well be a case for mixed teams. I think having to do proper heat loss calculations, proper, demand curves, being able to understand. It's not only the type of the house, it's the nature of the house. It's the way it faces, it's where it's geographically located, for heaven's sake. And I think that where we probably had that failing is very little conversation between skills. So between insulation people and roofers and glaziers and plumbers and whatever. And I think there's definitely a case there for mixed teams, local mixed teams, where you can form either formal or informal partnerships. But one thing's for sure, and it's one of the big complaints, is that many appliances are oversized because it's safer to make them oversized than undersized. But actually, as insulation improves, then clearly heat demand's going to reduce, and therefore we should have less need for larger appliances. However, we still have the situation where if heat pumps are to work efficiently, they have to be in a relatively well-insulated building. I had a discussion last week where people were telling me that wasn't true. And if somebody can show me the evidence of that, then I'd be delighted. But I can assure you, in my experience, it has to be in a relatively insulated building, and of course it has to have a distribution system to match the output of the product, which is a low temperature device.
No, well, they do work in uninsulated buildings and they do run at low temperature, but they cost a fortune.
Indeed,
the crucial.
Indeed. Perhaps I should have. I used the wrong terminology there, Lee.
It'd heat the house.
Yes. Yeah, but it's electric heater in that circumstance. And I know there are new products coming out which are improving temperatures. They're achieving better temperatures. But I think at the moment, I go back to what I said, is the need for transparency and the need for knowledge sharing between people, so we can understand how we can address these things, how we can get around some of these challenges. And people have experiences in some areas as opposed to others. So why not harness that?
And a bit on just a segue from knowledge sharing, we will be sharing the white paper link in the chat for everyone, and also we'll send it round via email after this session. So we've got another sort of few minutes just if there are any other kind of questions coming in. Otherwise, I'm going to ask all of our esteemed guests here for a key takeaway to leave you with. Bill is asking about the ongoing rollout of district heating in cities and towns to alleviate the reliance on fossil fuels. district heating. Would anyone like to sort of pick that one up?
I'll say a few words if you like, surprisingly. District heating is a no-brainer in a greenfield site. For anything else, it's a pigging nightmare. You know, you're digging up roads, you're digging up pavements. Also at the moment, actually, they don't have the same rights as utilities. So they don't have the legal rights to dig up roads and pavements. It sounds like an awfully good idea. Where I think it can be effective is clearly a new build. I think it's a wonderful idea. And secondly, I think in limited spaces. So people think heat networks have to be absolutely gigantic, multi-unit networks. Two houses sharing a heat source is a network, and 3 or 4 houses, I think particularly in rural settings, that can be a really effective way of providing heat.
Absolutely. Anyone? So Colin, what would be your key takeaway for the audience here today?
I think it's just the need to start. I mean, I think as everyone said, it needs to be clear to everyone, to industry. I think it is getting clear, but to consumers as well, that this change is going to happen. It's going to be a significant change, and we need to start that right away. And as I say, if the big technologies aren't there yet, then there's an awful lot we can do. It's all part of the same journey. If you say, well, a heat pump's got to be in a well-insulated home with a low temperature system, well, that's what we want for every home anyway. So we might as well do that, make all these homes ready so you can put a heat pump in the future. But if you're putting in a hydrogen boiler or something else, it's still going to be operating efficiently. But we do need to start now.
Gareth, I mean, there was a question about, I think, training. Does Danfoss provide training to gas engineers of heat pumps? But I don't think you guys really specialise in the heat pump. Is that right?
We don't do heat pumps, no, but we do offer training for controls, wiring, and the other solutions that we offer. We're currently running a series of webinars because we obviously can't do face-to-face training, so it's all on our website.
Okay, brilliant. And what about a key message from the white paper to share with people when they go and read it? What should they look out for?
I think it's as I said, it's not one solution for all. It's going to be made up of lots of different things. As Colin said, we need to start changing things now. So it's really to kick off the conversation. And I think ultimately, as Lee touched on earlier, at the end of the day, regardless of the solution that you use, you're going to need effective control and balancing in the systems. So that needs to be the key thing, that underlies everything. It needs to be the main consideration when installing the various technologies.
Absolutely. And I'm going to come to Lee, and then we do have a couple of roundup questions that I will bring in that just come through. But Lee, another question to you, which is about, how many installers do the design, the layout, the pipe sizing, the heat loss calculations? How many people do that? Is there software that you can use for that? Very helpful.
Very, very few do it. Yeah, would be the honest answer. Let's pick a number. I'd be surprised if 5% of boilers fitted this year will have a design behind them, or any consideration beyond sticking what's there or what they do all the time.
So what would be what would be your wish, perhaps?
My wish, my takeaway thought, I think there needs to be a lot of effort right now to get to grips with current building standards and regulations. We need accountability and we need control. And only, we've got to build that foundation. So then when we do tweak the rules and bring in whatever solutions are there, that we make sure they're done right.
And then there's 2 final questions I'm going to get you guys to just reflect on. One is heat pumps versus hydrogen. Who will be the winner? I think perhaps agreed that it was going to be all part of, everything has a role to play. Is that fair? Or would anyone like to back a horse?
I'd prefer heat pumps. I think one of my biggest concerns about hydrogen is the current cost they're talking about. I'd see fuel poverty all the time. People don't want me to turn their heating on when I'm doing a gas check because they're worried about it. I've seen figures quoted up to 16 times more expensive for the homeowner for hydrogen over natural gas, and that's just...
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on that, you know, how do we get customers to care about this stuff?
That's a really good question. And I go back to what I said before. There has to be transparency. Look, we have to have some sort of knowledge source which is accessible by all. It's accessible by consumers, it's accessible by tradespeople, it's accessible by manufacturers, and it has to be honest and provable. And that I cannot think of a more richer asset than that, which would let everybody work, you know, along the same lines and hear the same things. And for consumers, I'd say, for heaven's sake, please listen to your professional. Don't think that Google is the source of information, you know, and listen to somebody who does it day in, day out as a job, and they can give you their invaluable experience. And that would be my plea for people.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? Sort of about trust and trusting in stores. Is it something you recognise there, Lee? Do most customers trust you? Yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky. I've had a few hard conversations over the years where people have a certain manufacturer or kilowatt size in mind, what they need, and they think is best, and I have to disprove those myths.
Mythbuster.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Guys, I just want to come into the end of our time, so I just want to thank you all for joining. I particularly want to thank our panelists, Lee, Tim, Gareth, Colin. Thank you so much for coming on today. Thanks everyone here for joining. If you didn't get your question answered, we will do our best to follow up with you, get some answers afterwards. We'll try and sort all that out. We will share the recording of this session. It's been recorded, so we'll pop that link sort of available online, so you can always watch back again or share it with anyone who couldn't make it. And finally, the link to download the white paper, I will just share in the conversation now. And we will also share that round with everyone who registered for the event. So that's as free to download, nice bit of bedtime reading, I think, there for everyone. And thanks very much to sort of Danfoss for putting that together. And thanks everyone for coming on today. And hopefully we'll see you all at... We've got a whole load of discussions, panels, debates, training sessions throughout the course of this week. So hopefully everyone can join those future events. Thanks very much. Goodbye.